beginning, there was darkness. Awana made himself into the sun and impregnated the primeval waters which covered the face of the earth. Out of the waters rose the Sky Father and the Earth Mother, who continued Awana creation by shaping the world. Through the first, second, and third world climbed the ancestors of humanity. It was Masawu, ruler of the upper world, caretaker of the dead, owner of fire, and oddly enough, considering these traits, a trickster god, who ushered the Puebloans into the third world, along with the gift of fire. The third world should have been a veritable paradise in comparison to the two lower worlds. However, in addition to Masawa's gifts, the Puebloans found that the Powacas have followed them into that world. A Powaca is an evil sorcerer who made medicine to injure those they envy or dislike. Once this corruption appeared, it spread in the ways that were depressingly predictable. The youth stopped respecting the elders, adultery became rampant, and people spent their time in the kivas, the sacred chambers of worship, not in religious ceremonies, but in gambling and partaking of hallucinogenics. In order to escape the evil caused by the two-hearted Powacas, the pure Puebloans climbed a reed into the fourth world, our world. Shortly after their emergence in this world, the young child of the chief sickened and died. The grief-stricken father knew that something was badly amiss in the fourth world, where death was not supposed to occur. His child's death meant that a Powaca from the world below had come up with the good people before they managed to seal the entrance from the evil world below. When the chief asked his people who among them was the Powaca, none of them confessed. Then he threw a cornmeal ball high into the air, saying that it would land on the head of the guilty person. When it hit the head of one of the men, the chief prepared to throw the guilty Powaca down into the third world, but the Powaca showed him that his child was happy down below in the afterlife, playing with the other children. The chief looked down and saw that his child was indeed happy, and permitted the Powaca to stay. This is how death entered our world, and how each person must struggle to learn and choose between good and evil. The Zuni people are an ancient Puebloan culture, native to the Zuni River Valley. Like many other indigenous tribes of the United States, the Zuni believe in magic and witchcraft. For the Zuni, the belief in witchcraft goes back to their earliest times, included in Zuni creation myths. According to their oral tradition, a pair of witches came up from the underworld bringing the people two gifts, death to keep the world from becoming overcrowded, and corn to keep the people fed. In the Southwest, witches and healers, either men or women, were those who manifested early talents for communicating with the spirit world. Healers and witches usually received a vision or spiritual guidance instructing them in sacred songs and prayers for healing, for abundance, for blessing, to locate lost people, to control the weather, to weaken an enemy, or to curse a person. Some healers, known as medicine doctors, were taken to a sacred mountain or cave where they were initiated into a ceremony and received instructions about what and how to do it. During the healing, there is a constant interplay between spiritual power and the practitioner. Magical powers were not always differentiated as good or evil, with people using their magical skills for several purposes. In fact, the concept of a witch was tied to the concepts of life and human origin, with the people believing that witches existed alongside humans and not apart from other living beings. Thus, they were not supernatural. The Tewa believed that witches accompany people daily and are defined as those of a, quote, different breath. However, they had a different physical and spiritual existence, not like common humans. Rather, they had to live on the unexpired lives of their victims by capturing or indoctrinating their souls. Further, they had to continually kill or perish themselves. Because of this requirement to continually kill, witchcraft was blamed for any disaster of magnitude like droughts, epidemic diseases, or floods. Further, any disharmony among the people or infractions of proper behavior were also equated with witchcraft. At one point, witchcraft among the Zuni was the only recognized crime. The Council of High Priests decided who the witches were, and the Bow Priests were tasked with their executions. Because the council was supposed to be removed from any violence, the Bow Priests, who were associated with war, enforced their decisions. The Bow Priests were also responsible for the examining of the accused and reviewing the evidence. If the accused was found guilty, he or she was hung by the wrists and tortured until he or she confessed. If the accused revealed the source of his or her power, he might be released, or at least saved from execution. The tangible effects of witchcraft on Puebloan society can be seen as far back as the 1100s, when archaeologists surmise that drought, warfare, and mass migration rocked the tribes of the Southwest. In the Arroyo Hondo Pueblo, 7 skeletons were found huddled together in a kiva, where scientists surmise they were ritually crushed to death with rocks. Dr. Schwartz surmises, in the Pueblo system, witches are responsible for all bad things. Crushing suspected sorcerers with rocks was common punishment. Anthropologist Ann Polkovich states, quote, "It is plausible to imagine that these residents may have found reason to accuse other villagers of sorcery. Those suffering great hardship may have found reason to blame those who were not as severely affected. Hunger, disease, and death were major disruptions in the social order. These misfortunes had a cause. Within the Puebloan worldview, sorcery was a compelling reason. Witches could have been blamed for the villagers' hardships. Witch hunts affected the social order at the Arroyo Hondo and ultimately may be partly to blame for the abandonment of the village." End quote. When the Spanish arrived in the New World, witchcraft of both cultures, both Pueblo and Poaca, and Spanish brujeria, continued to plague the land. Fray Alonso de Benavides arrived in New Mexico in 1625. His are among the earliest testimony to the practice of witchcraft among Spanish and Puebloan peoples, and despite the best efforts among the Franciscans, over 100 years later, the practice of witchcraft was still thriving. Father Juan José Toledo, the priest assigned to the Abiquiu Pueblo in 1755, began writing reports to the governor in Santa Fe, stating that he had been bewitched. He had pains, would often choke and cough, felt a movable ball growing in his belly, and had been so beset with unimaginable pain that it nearly killed him. He was sure that a man and his wife in the Pueblo were trying to kill him using witchcraft. Launching a pursuit of his tormentors did not slow his pain, but revealed many practices, rites, and ceremonies being performed by the residents of the Pueblo. Father Toledo's situation soon deepened to include shape-shifting, Indians taking the form of an animal, the shooting of cursed objects into other bodies, which required a practice called sucking in order to cure the patient, and several accusations that witches had caused others to die. The lonely priest recorded his findings in long reports to the governor, nearby priests, and other church representatives. The governor, Tomás Vélez Cachupin, imprisoned several prominent sorcerers, hoping that it would quiet the situation. But the next witchcraft episode involved not classic witchcraft, but demonic possession, causing Father Toledo to wield the sword of exorcism. An 18-year-old girl shook uncontrollably, followed by frightening and furious cries, then flailed her arms and legs, then howled. A 12-year-old girl reported severe pains in her right side and suffered violent convulsions. During Mass, an older woman fell on the floor, giving out howls and war chants, singing like owls, foxes, and pigs, contorting her arms and back, and made horrible expressions with her face. Villagers were found with small effigies made from clay, and sticks into which thorns and needles were stuck. A few witnessed to hearing demons that spoke out loud and told them things that no one else could have known. Still, others were suspected of being fully possessed by the demons, and when the priest attempted to exorcise the spirits, it only increased their, quote, great cackling and vulgarities, unquote, and showed strengths that would overcome 4 to 6 men. The governor ordered a junta, a commission of priests and ecclesiastical scholars, to examine the reports of Father Toledo and other witnesses, to recommend how to deal with the situation. They met together in 1764 in Santa Fe and had long heated discussions for days. Afterwards, they had some minor recommendations, like continued destruction of profane sites and images, but the ultimate conclusion was that the matter should be submitted to the office of the Inquisitor in New Mexico City. After nearly 10 years in 1766, the exorcisms and witchcraft among the residents of Abiquiu finally subsided. Though the Spanish, when they ruled in the Southwest, tried to change the culture of the Puebloan Indians, including their belief and practice of witchcraft, they were unsuccessful. After the Puebloan revolt, the Spanish relaxed the restrictions on the Pueblo culture, and the belief in witchcraft continued. When the United States obtained New Mexico and other areas in the Southwest, Indian agents were sent out to monitor the Indians and to attempt to change their culture. After years, several reports were made regarding Zuni witchcraft and its punishment. Reports indicated that in March of 1855, Indians of the Nambe Pueblo in New Mexico butchered 3 men and 1 woman of their village, most horribly, for alleged witchcraft. In 1880, an Indian agent reported seeing a man tied up by his wrists behind his back and lifted so that his feet could not touch the ground. The Zuni said that he had brought sickness and death to some of the people. Another report indicated that a Zuni Indian killed a woman of the same pueblo, believing her to be a witch and that she had caused the death of his children. In August of 1889, accusations of witchcraft were agitated because of drought. It was said that someone must be keeping away the rain. A poor old man was accused, and he was hung up by his wrists, tied behind his back. After he confessed, they let him down. After receiving more threats, the man left the pueblo, and a Mexican who took pity on him gave him a home. The drought continued nevertheless, and the witch excitement spread. In October, an old woman was hung up in like manner as a witch until she confessed. She implicated her nephew, a boy of 16 years, a common thief. He was hanged in the same way, was let down once or twice, was beaten about his head with sticks, and was hung again. He remained hanging all night and all day until he died the next night. A dozen Americans witnessed the hanging. One gentleman tried to cut the boy down but was forbidden to interfere and told, "None American's business." During the Zuni witch trials, there was a focus on confessions. These confessions were not only used to find guilt in the accused witch, but in a large amount of cases also used to find the witch's knowledge, because they believed that once the knowledge was known, that it became less powerful. Also, the priests who were doing the confessions were sometimes seeking the information to further themselves personally. Sometimes the individual is released if they are willing to reform or give away their ritual knowledge. One of the primary goals of the priests is to find other witches, because witches were believed to perform in a witch society comprised of multiple witches, not unlike the European concept of a coven of witches. When witches were executed, not only them, but sometimes multiple other family members were executed as well. The disposal of the bodies is also very interesting. Many times, people accused of witchcraft who were executed would not receive a proper burial. The treatment of their body after execution depended on the crimes or threat of the accused. One of the common disposals was simply removing the body from the pueblo and leaving it out to rot. In an Indian agent report of 1892, it was recorded, "This evil still goes on. The victims are often those who depart from the old pueblo customs and incline to the ways of civilized life. In the estimation of the ruling Zuni, what we call progress is the most criminal offense and must be trodden out by the most summary and vindictive tortures." While this report was waiting for the printer, early in December, 2 Zuni Indians with whom I talked freely last July were seized and subjected to witch torture methods. They were probably the most progressive of any people in the pueblo. Seized, violently seized. They were strung up by their wrists, beaten with war clubs, and kept hanging all night, all the next day, and until 10 o'clock the second night. They were let down occasionally for a few moments to induce confession, but suffered indescribable torture. To end the suffering, they finally confessed that they were witches, and were let off when life was almost gone. Some perished in these tortures. I asked an intelligent gentleman, a resident in this pueblo for 12 years, how often do these witch cases occur? He replied, one nearly every year, either resulting in death or being run off from the pueblo, and even then sometimes followed and killed. Some years, more than one. Half a dozen Americans have witnessed some cases. No Zuni Indian has been brought to justice and punished for these outrages, but now 3 men are arrested for the late offenses and in jail awaiting trial. They are undoubtedly not the guilty parties. The real offenders, men of influence in managing the affairs of the pueblo, turned over to the authorities these 3 poor men who were unable to help themselves and expected thus to clear their own skirts. In 1898 to 1899, a smallpox epidemic was blamed for witchcraft, and in 1910 to 1911, a measles epidemic was also blamed on sorcery. During the smallpox epidemic, 2 young men were held responsible. It would have been executed except for an American school teacher who got a detachment of soldiers to protect them. Though the witches were saved, some of the soldiers and their horses died of poisoning. The US government stopped the Zuni's public torture and execution of witches, but some convicted witches were still killed in secret. The last public witch trials of the Zuni were in 1925. However, a belief in witchcraft remained for many years and in some cases is still alive and well today.